The city was always alive at night, but tonight it felt different. The streets were empty, save for the occasional passerby hurrying to find shelter from the impending storm. I stood under the awning of a rundown diner, nursing a cold cup of coffee as I scrolled through my phone. That's when I saw him, the smiling man. At first, I thought it was just a weird meme or a viral challenge, but as I delved deeper into the thread, I realized it was something much more sinister. People were sharing their encounters with a mysterious figure, always dressed in a suit, with an unsettling grin plastered on his face. Some claimed he was a harbinger of doom, while others believed he was a manifestation of their deepest fears. I dismissed it as mere internet folklore, but as I continued reading, I stumbled upon a post from a user named Lurking Shadow. The post was simple, yet chilling. I saw him in my dreams. Now he's standing outside my window. Suddenly, the storm outside seemed to intensify, and the diner's neon sign flickered ominously. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered if there was any truth to these claims. That's when I saw him, the smiling man, standing across the street, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. My heart racing, I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, but when I looked up, he was gone. The storm seemed to dissipate as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind an unsettling feeling that lingered long after I fled the diner. As I walked home, the street seemed to grow darker, the shadows twisting into menacing forms. I quickened my pace, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. But as I looked around my familiar surroundings, I couldn't shake off the feeling that lingered long after I fled the diner. And who was the smiling man, really? I tried to brush it off as a prank, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I began to notice strange things. A faint smell of smoke in my apartment, the sound of whispers in the dead of night, and the feeling of being followed whenever I left my building. It was as if the smiling man had awakened something within me, something that threatened to consume me whole. I knew I had to dig deeper, to uncover the truth behind the mysterious figure and the sinister forces that seemed to be closing in around me. And so, I embarked on a journey into the heart of darkness. A journey that would take me down the rabbit hole of the dark web, where the smiling man awaited, his grin growing wider with every step I took. As I delved deeper into the mysteries of the dark web, I began to realize that the smiling man was just the tip of the iceberg. There were forces at work, forces that defied explanation, and I was about to stumble into the midst of them. I spent hours scouring the dark web, searching for any mention of the smiling man. I stumbled upon a forum, hidden deep within the recesses of the dark web, where people shared their encounters with the mysterious figure. As I read through the posts, I began to notice a pattern. Each person who claimed to have seen the smiling man had one thing in common: they had all been experiencing strange and terrifying occurrences in the days leading up to their encounter. One person claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in their home, while another spoke of hearing disembodied voices in the dead of night. I began to wonder if there was a connection between the smiling man and these strange occurrences. I decided to dig deeper, to see if I could uncover any evidence that linked the smiling man to the strange happenings. I spent hours poring over the posts, searching for any mention of a connection. And then, I stumbled upon a post that made my blood run cold. A user named Darkness Descendant claimed to have seen the smiling man in their home, just before their family was torn apart by a series of tragic events. The post was old, dating back several years, but it sent a chill down my spine. I began to wonder if the smiling man was more than just a mysterious figure, if he was somehow connected to the very fabric of reality itself. I continued to read, my heart racing with anticipation. And then, I stumbled upon a post that made my blood run cold. To whoever is reading this, the post read, "I have seen the smiling man, and I know what he wants." My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. Who was this person and what did they know about the smiling person? I scrolled down eager to read more, but the post was deleted. The account was gone, vanished into thin air. I was left with more questions than answers. Who was the smiling man, and what did he want? And what was the connection between him and the strange occurrences that seemed to follow him wherever he went? I knew I had to keep digging, to uncover the truth behind the smiling man. And so, I continued my journey, descending deeper into the heart of madness. But little did I know, I was not alone. There were others out there, others who were also searching for answers. And as I delved deeper into the mysteries of the dark web, I began to realize that I was not the only one who was being watched. The smiling man was just the beginning, a mere pawn in a much larger game. And as I continued my journey, I began to uncover the sinister forces that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. But I was not afraid. I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how sinister it might be. And so, I pressed on, descending deeper into the heart of madness. As I continued to explore the dark web, I stumbled upon a hidden forum, where users shared their experiences with the supernatural. I spent hours reading through the posts, searching for any mention of the smiling man. And then, I stumbled upon a post that caught my eye. A user named Spirit Hunter claimed to have encountered the smiling man in an abandoned asylum, deep in the heart of the city. I knew I had to investigate further. I sent a private message to Spirit Hunter, asking him to meet me at the asylum. And then, I waited. The hours ticked by, and I heard nothing from Spirit Hunter. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake, if I had stumbled into something that was beyond my control. But then, I received a message. Meet me at the asylum at midnight, it read. Come alone. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. What was I getting myself into? And what would I find at the asylum? I knew I had to be careful, but I was determined to uncover the truth. And so, I made my way to the asylum, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As I approached the entrance, I felt a chill run down my spine. The building loomed above me, its walls seeming to stretch forever. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The darkness enveloped me, and I was alone, or so I thought. As I stepped inside the asylum, I was immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist on the walls. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, casting a weak beam of light down the dark corridor. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I made my way deeper into the asylum. I had been warned not to come here alone, but I had to see it for myself. I had to know if the smiling man was real. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon a room that seemed to have been left untouched for decades. The beds were still made, the sheets stained with mysterious substances. And on the wall, a message was scrawled in red ink. He is always watching. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words. Who was watching? And why? I continued to explore the asylum, searching for any sign of the smiling man. But as I delved deeper into the depths of the building, I began to realize that I was not alone. I heard footsteps echoing down the corridors, the sound of whispers in the darkness. And then, I saw him. The smiling man was standing in front of me, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. I tried to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. The smiling man was nowhere to be seen, but I knew that I had to get out of there. I stumbled to my feet and made my way back to the entrance, my heart racing with fear. As I emerged into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But as I looked back at the asylum, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The smiling man was standing in the window, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. And then, he vanished. I knew that I had to get to the bottom of the mystery. I had to know who the smiling man was, and what he wanted. And so, I began to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface. But as I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to realize that I was in over my head. The smiling man was just the tip of the iceberg, a mere pawn in a much larger game. And I was about to become the next pawn. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to uncover a web of conspiracy that went far beyond the smiling man. I discovered that the asylum where I had encountered him was just one of many institutions that had been involved in secret experiments. The experiments, which had been conducted in the 1950s and 1960s, had been designed to test the limits of human endurance. Patients had been subjected to sensory deprivation, physical torture, and psychological manipulation. And at the center of it all was the smiling man. I couldn't understand why the smiling man was so important, but I was determined to find out. I spent hours poring over documents and interviewing former patients and staff members. And then, I stumbled upon a shocking revelation. The smiling man was not just a person, he was a symbol of the horrors that had been perpetrated in the name of science. I realized that the smiling man was just one part of a much larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that involved government agencies, corporations, and other powerful organizations. And I was just a small part of it. I knew that I had to be careful, but I was determined to expose the truth. I began to write a story about the smiling man and the conspiracy, but as I delved deeper into the research, I realized that I was in grave danger. People were watching me, following me, and I knew that if I didn't stop, I would be silenced forever. But I refused to back down. I knew that I had to tell the story, no matter the cost. And so, I continued to write, pouring my heart and soul into the story. But as I wrote, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The smiling man was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make my next move. And I knew that I was running out of time. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to uncover a web of conspiracy that went far beyond the smiling man. I discovered that the asylum where I had encountered him was just one of many institutions that had been involved in secret experiments. The experiments, which had been conducted in the 1950s and 1960s, had been designed to test the limits of human endurance. Patients had been subjected to sensory deprivation, physical torture, and psychological manipulation. And at the center of it all was the smiling man. I couldn't understand why the smiling man was so important, but I was determined to find out. I spent hours poring over documents and interviewing former patients and staff members. And then, I stumbled upon a shocking revelation. The smiling man was not just a person, he was a symbol of the horrors that had been perpetrated in the name of science. I realized that the smiling man was just one part of a much larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that involved government agencies, corporations, and other powerful organizations. And I was just a small part of it. I knew that I had to be careful, but I was determined to expose the truth. I began to write a story about the smiling man and the conspiracy, but as I delved deeper into the research, I realized that I was in grave danger. People were watching me, following me, and I knew that if I didn't stop, I would be silenced forever. But I refused to back down. I knew that I had to tell the story, no matter the cost. And so, I continued to write, pouring my heart and soul into the story. But as I wrote, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The smiling man was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make my next move. And I knew that I was running out of time. As I finished writing the story, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had exposed the truth about the smiling man and the conspiracy, and I knew that I had done something important. But as I looked around my apartment, I realized that I was not alone. The smiling man was standing in the corner, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I tried to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The smiling man began to move closer, his grin growing wider with every step. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. They told me that I had been found unconscious in my apartment, and that I had been in a coma for weeks. As I looked around the hospital room, I realized that something was off. The doctors and nurses seemed to be watching me, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. And then, I saw him. The smiling man was standing in the corner of the room, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I tried to scream, but my voice was hoarse and barely audible. The doctors and nurses rushed to my side, trying to calm me down. But I knew the truth. The smiling man was real, and he was always watching. As I lay in the hospital bed, I realized that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself. The smiling man was just a small part of a much larger conspiracy, a conspiracy that involved government agencies, corporations, and other powerful organizations. And I had exposed it all. I knew that I had to get out of there, to escape from the smiling man and the conspiracy. But as I looked around the hospital room, I realized that I was trapped. The smiling man was always watching, waiting for me to make my next move. And I knew that I was running out of time. The last thing I remember is the smiling man's face, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. And then, everything went black. They say that I'm still in the hospital trapped in coma, but I know the truth. The smiling man got me and I'll never be seen again. The story of the smiling man will live on, a cautionary tale about the danger of the delving too deep into the mysterious of the dark web. But for me it's too late. The smiling man has won and I'll be trapped forever in his twisted game. The end. The Russian sleep experiment was a tale of horror that had been circulating on the dark web for years. It was said that in the 1940s, 5 Soviet scientists had been sealed in a lab for 30 days to test the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation. The experiment had gone horribly wrong, and the scientists were driven mad by hallucinations and paranoia. In the depths of the dark web, a forum thread had been dedicated to the experiment. Users would share their own experiences and theories about the events that had transpired. Some claimed to have seen footage of the experiment, while others said they had spoken to individuals who had been involved. The thread was shrouded in mystery, with many users questioning its authenticity. But one thing was certain: the Russian sleep experiment had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of pushing the human body to its limits. In a small, dimly lit room, a young journalist named Sarah sat hunched over her computer. She had been researching the Russian sleep experiment for weeks, poring over forum threads and conducting interviews with experts. Her goal was to uncover the truth behind the experiment and share it with the world. As she scrolled through the forum thread, Sarah stumbled upon a post from a user named Erebus. The post was cryptic, but it seemed to hint at the existence of footage from the experiment. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she quickly sent a private message to Erebus, asking if he had any information to share. The response came quickly. Erebus agreed to meet with Sarah in person, but only if she was willing to meet him at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity got the better of her. She agreed to meet Erebus, unaware of the horrors that awaited her. As Sarah made her way to the warehouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the creaking of the old wooden floorboards echoed through the abandoned warehouse, a haunting serenade to the darkness that lurked within. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and rot, a noxious miasma that clung to the skin like a damp shroud. In the depths of the warehouse, a lone figure stirred. Sarah, a young woman with a look of determination etched on her face, slowly opened her eyes. She was lying on a narrow bed, surrounded by the rusting hulks of ancient machinery. A faint hum of electricity crackled through the air, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Sarah's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, and she saw a figure standing over her, watching her with an unblinking gaze. It was Erebus, his face a map of wrinkles and age spots, his eyes glinting with a malevolent intensity. He held a small notebook in his hand, his bony fingers grasping it like a claw. "Welcome, Sarah," he croaked, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "The experiment is about to begin." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she realized the true horror of her situation. She was trapped, alone and defenseless, in a place where the boundaries between reality and madness were about to become very blurred indeed. Sarah's world was turned upside down as Erebus dragged her deeper into the warehouse. She struggled and kicked, but he was too strong. He tossed her into a small, dimly lit room with no windows. The room was sparse, with only a small bed and a chair in the corner. Erebus locked the door behind him, leaving Sarah alone and frightened. As the hours passed, Sarah heard strange noises coming from outside her room. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, and she could have sworn she heard whispers in the darkness. Sarah's mind began to play tricks on her. She started to see things out of the corner of her eye, but whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. She knew she had to keep her sanity if she wanted to survive. Sarah tried to focus on her breathing, but her mind kept wandering back to the video she had seen. The scientists in the video had been driven mad by their own hallucinations. Sarah wondered if the same thing was happening to her. As the darkness closed in around her, Sarah heard a faint whispering in her ear. It was a soft, raspy voice that seemed to be saying her name over and over again. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. She spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. Sarah's heart was racing as she realized that she was losing her grip on reality. She was descending into madness, just like the scientists in the video. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The room was silent once again, except for the sound of Sarah's own ragged breathing. She collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and terrified. Sarah knew that she had to find a way out of the warehouse before it was too late. But as she lay there, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The darkness seemed to be pressing in around her, suffocating her. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of movement. And then, she saw it. A small flicking light corner of the room. It was the camera watching her. Sarah's heart sank as she realized she was being watched. The camera's gaze seemed to bore into her soul, making her skin crawl. She tried to cover her face, but it was too late. Erebus's voice echoed through the room. Ah, Sarah, you're adjusting well to your new surroundings. The lights flickered, and the camera's lens zoomed in on Sarah's face. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as Erebus continued. You see, Sarah, the Russian sleep experiment was just the beginning. We've been studying the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human mind. And you, Sarah, are our latest test subject. Sarah's mind reeled as she realized the true extent of Erebus's plan. She was trapped, and she had to find a way to escape before it was too late. The camera's gaze seemed to intensify, and Sarah felt like she was being pulled into its depths. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the horror that surrounded her. But when she opened them again, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The camera had zoomed out, revealing a figure standing just behind it. It was one of the scientists from the video, his eyes black as coal, and his skin gray and decaying. Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of Erebus's maniacal laughter. The figure began to move closer, its eyes fixed on Sarah. She tried to scramble backward, but her body felt heavy, as if it was anchored to the bed. The figure loomed over her, its breath cold and rank. Sarah felt her sanity slipping away, consumed by the horror that surrounded her. And then, everything went black. As Sarah watched the video, she felt a sense of unease growing inside her. The images on the screen seemed to be shifting and distorting, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Suddenly, the video feed cut off, and the room was plunged into darkness. Sarah heard footsteps echoing through the warehouse, growing louder with each passing moment. She tried to call out, but her voice was hoarse and barely audible. The footsteps stopped right in front of her, and Sarah felt a presence looming over her. And then, a voice whispered in her ear, "The experiment is far from over, Sarah. In fact, it's only just beginning." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she realized that she was in grave danger. She had to escape, but how? Sarah's mind was reeling as she tried to process the sinister voice's words. The experiment is far from over, Sarah. In fact, it's only just beginning. She tried to struggle, but her body felt heavy, as if it was anchored to the bed. The voice seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. Suddenly, the lights flickered back to life, and Sarah saw Erebus standing over her, a sinister grin spreading across his face. You see, Sarah, the Russian sleep experiment was just the beginning, he said, his voice dripping with malice. We've been studying the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human mind. But that's not all. We've also been experimenting with the boundaries of reality itself. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized the true extent of Erebus's plan. You're trying to break down the walls between reality and madness, she whispered. Erebus nodded, his eyes glinting with excitement. That's right, Sarah. And you're going to help us. Sarah's heart sank as she realized she was trapped in a living nightmare. She had to escape, but how? As she looked around the room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A door, hidden behind a curtain, was slightly ajar. And on the other side of the door, Sarah saw a figure waiting for her. It was one of the scientists from the video, his eyes black as coal, and his skin gray and decaying. Sarah knew she had to get out of there, fast. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah struggled against her restraints, desperate to break free. But as she looked up at Erebus, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Erebus was holding a syringe, filled with a dark, murky liquid. "Time for your next injection, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Sarah knew she was running out of time. She had to escape, before it was too late. But as she looked around the room, she realized that she was trapped, with no way out. Or was she? Sarah's heart was racing as she realized she had to escape, and fast. She looked around the room, desperate for any opportunity to break free. That's when she saw it, a small, almost imperceptible gap between the door and the frame. It was a tiny opening, but it was enough. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah struggled against her restraints, desperate to break free. She wriggled and squirmed, her body straining against the straps. Erebus laughed, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You think you can escape, Sarah?" he sneered. "You're not going anywhere." But Sarah was determined. She strained and struggled, her body screaming in protest. And then, suddenly, she was free. She tumbled out of the bed, landing hard on the floor. Erebus shouted in anger, but Sarah was already scrambling to her feet. She sprinted across the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear Erebus behind her, his footsteps echoing off the walls. Sarah reached the door and flung it open, revealing a long, dark corridor beyond. She didn't hesitate, sprinting down the corridor with Erebus hot on her heels. She could hear his labored breathing, his footsteps getting closer and closer. Sarah's heart was racing, her body screaming in terror. And then, suddenly, she saw a glimmer of light ahead. It was a door, slightly ajar, leading out into the night. Sarah burst through the door, gasping in the cool night air. She looked around, desperate for any sign of safety. And then, she saw it, a car, parked on the street outside. It was her only hope. Sarah sprinted towards the car, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear Erebus behind her, his footsteps echoing off the walls. She reached the car and flung open the door, diving inside just as Erebus was about to grab her. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking it just in time. Erebus pounded on the window, his face twisted in rage. Sarah started the engine, peeling out of there just as Erebus was about to break the glass. Sarah drove for hours, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit. She had finally started to relax, thinking she had left Erebus and his sinister plans behind. But as she stopped at a red light, she saw a figure standing on the sidewalk, watching her. It was a woman with long, dark hair and a white coat, her eyes fixed intently on Sarah. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she realized the woman was staring directly at her. She felt a chill run down her spine as the woman's eyes seemed to bore into her soul. The light turned green, and Sarah sped away, her heart racing with fear. She didn't dare look back, fearing what she might see. As she drove, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pursued. She kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the woman's face staring back at her. But there was never anyone there. Or was there? Sarah's mind was reeling with questions. Who was the woman? What did she want? And why was Sarah being pursued? As she drove, the darkness seemed to close in around her. Sarah felt like she was being pulled into a nightmare from which she couldn't awaken. And then, suddenly, her phone rang. Sarah jumped, her heart racing with fear. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And then, a voice spoke, its tone low and menacing. "Sarah, you can't escape," it said. "We'll always find you." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized who was on the other end of the line. It was Erebus, and he was coming for her. Sarah's heart was racing as she listened to Erebus's menacing voice on the other end of the line. She knew she had to get out of there, fast. "Where are you?" Erebus asked, his voice dripping with malice. Sarah didn't answer. She just threw the phone out the window, watching as it shattered on the pavement below. She floored it, speeding down the highway as fast as she could. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get as far away from Erebus as possible. As she drove, Sarah's mind was racing with questions. What did Erebus want from her? Why was he pursuing her so relentlessly? And then, it hit her. The Russian sleep experiment. It was all connected. Sarah remembered the video she had seen, the one with the scientists descending into madness. She realized that Erebus was trying to recreate the experiment, using her as a test subject. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the true extent of Erebus's sinister plot. She was in grave danger, and she had to get out of there before it was too late. Sarah spotted a sign on the side of the road, advertising a small motel a few miles ahead. She took the exit, speeding towards the motel with a sense of desperation. She skidded into the parking lot, jumping out of the car and sprinting towards the office. She burst through the door, slamming it shut behind her. The clerk looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" he asked. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I need a room," she said, her voice shaking with fear. "And I need it now." The clerk nodded, handing her a key. "Room 217, he said. "But be careful. There's been some strange reports coming from that room." Sarah's heart sank. She knew she was taking a risk, but she had no choice. She took the key and sprinted towards the room, hoping against hope that she would be safe. But as she opened the door, she realized that she was not alone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she saw a figure sitting in the shadows of the motel room. The air was thick with tension as she tried to make out who it was. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw the woman with long, dark hair and a white coat, the same woman she had seen on the sidewalk earlier. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she stood up and began to walk towards Sarah, her eyes fixed intently on her. Sarah backed away, her heart racing with fear. She tripped over her own feet and fell onto the bed, scrambling to get away from the woman. But as she looked up, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman's eyes had turned black as coal, and her skin was gray and decaying. Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of her own heartbeat. The woman reached out and grabbed her, pulling her into a dark and abyssal void. As Sarah fell into the void, she saw Erebus's face looming over her, his eyes glinting with malice. "You should have stayed awake, Sarah," he whispered. And then, everything went black. The next morning, the police found Sarah's car parked outside the motel, the engine still running. But Sarah was never seen again. The motel room was found empty, except for a single phrase scrawled on the wall in blood: "The experiment is never over." The Russian sleep experiment remained a dark and sinister mystery, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pushing the human mind to its limits. But some say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the shadows are long, you can still hear Sarah's screams.